This story is titled, After All I've Sacrificed, My Husband Demanded a DNA Test for Our Son. Here's what I did. Alright, here's the background so you get why I'm feeling pretty messed up about all this. So, I grew up in a pretty regular family. No silver spoons here. My husband and I both come from similar backgrounds. Families just scraping by and trying to keep things together. Neither of us grew up with a ton of money, and no one in our families was sitting around with a college degree, that's for sure. We both had to hustle to make it out of that cycle. Somehow, we managed to make it through college and actually build decent careers. I'm making a bit more than him, but that's never been an issue for us. At least I thought it wasn't. When we got married, I was already a homeowner. Nothing fancy, just a small, manageable house. It's not like I came from wealth or anything, but I worked hard, saved every penny, and managed to get a place of my own before we tied the knot. I also had a car, just a basic one, but it was fully paid off. I was just trying to be smart with my money and not fall into debt. My husband, on the other hand, was dealing with a mountain of debt. His credit was a mess, and it wasn't just student loans either. He'd had to help out his family with money more than once. They'd hit him up every time something went wrong. And to make it all worse, he has ADHD, so he's had issues keeping track of bills, which didn't exactly help his financial situation. None of this stuff was his fault, and I never held it against him. I mean, I knew what I was getting into. I saw he was trying, even if things were a bit of a mess, so I was there for him. When he moved in with me, we agreed to split the bills 50-50, but he didn't have to pay rent since I was covering the mortgage and home insurance. I figured it was my house, and I could handle that. I even started helping him pay off his debts. His car loan was wrecking his credit, so we ended up putting that in my name too, so he'd be able to get a better rate. I guess it sounds a little crazy, but I thought this was just what partners do for each other. Then I got a new job. It was a big step up, double the pay, but with a catch. The job was basically 50% travel. I'd be bouncing around to these data centers in the middle of nowhere, working with big, heavy equipment, moving cables around and all that. It wasn't glamorous. Honestly, it was exhausting, but we both agreed this was the right move for us. The plan was that I'd do it for a few years, save up, and help put a huge dent in his debt, and after that, I'd switch to something easier. It felt like a solid plan, like something that would set us up for a better future. The job took a toll, though. I was working in these freezing cold data centers, pulling cables, dealing with huge equipment, and spending nights in these tiny towns in the middle of nowhere. I missed my husband, missed sleeping in my own bed, and it wasn't like I had much of a social life anymore. All my energy went into work, and when I was back home, I tried to pour it into our relationship. Looking back, it was like I was running on fumes, doing this because I thought it'd be good for us. Despite all that, I kept going. I figured, hey, it's just for a few years. And the money was good. We managed to pay down a chunk of his debt, build up some savings, and start thinking about a family. He was grateful, or at least he seemed that way, but I never expected what would come next. The sacrifices I made, the long hours, the missed time with family and friends, it was all supposed to be for us. I thought he saw how much I was putting into this, into building a life that would make things better for both of us. I thought we were on the same page, working towards the same future. At that point, I felt like we'd built this strong foundation. Yeah, he wasn't bringing a house or a pristine credit score into the marriage, but he had a good heart, and I believed that the two of us together could handle anything. I was so sure we had this bond, this partnership that would hold up through anything. I'd done everything I could to show him I was committed, that I wanted this life with him. And yeah, it wasn't easy. But when you love someone, you just make it work, right? So there I was, feeling like we'd put in the effort, we'd laid out this future. We'd gone through rough patches already, with his family needing money, his financial messes, the long work hours, but I didn't think any of that could shake what we had. But soon, I'd find out that maybe he wasn't seeing things the same way. And that realization hit me harder than I could have ever expected. Alright, so here's where things started to go downhill fast. I was about 8 months pregnant, basically just getting to the finish line, and out of nowhere, my husband sits me down and says he wants a paternity test. No warning, no buildup, just, hey, I've been thinking. I need to know for sure this baby is mine. I was stunned. My jaw must have been on the floor because I remember just staring at him like, what did you just say? And at first I thought it had to be a joke, like he was messing around. But he wasn't laughing or smiling or anything. He was dead serious. My heart felt like it dropped right out of my chest. I mean, this was my husband, the guy I'd been breaking my back for, sacrificing time, energy, even risking my health for with this tough travel job. And he's sitting here looking me dead in the eye, saying he's not sure if he's the dad of the baby I'm carrying. I asked him why he felt that way. why he would even need something like that. And all he could say was that he just needed to be sure. He tried to tell me it wasn't personal, that it wasn't about me. He said he trusted me, but just needed some peace of mind. I don't know how he could say that with a straight face, because if he really trusted me, would he even be asking? It made no sense. I'd been with him every step of the way, doing everything I could to support him. But now, all of a sudden, he's questioning me? When I pressed him more, he finally admitted that some people, his friends and even his family members, had been putting ideas in his head. They were saying things like, "You're sure it's yours, right? She's gone all the time. Who knows what's really going on?" And apparently, he took that to heart. Instead of brushing it off, he started wondering if maybe they had a point. So now, after months of being pregnant, he hits me with this. I felt like I'd been sucker punched. I was upset. No, more than that. I was heartbroken. I couldn't believe that he'd let other people who didn't know anything about our relationship, plant these doubts in his head. After all we'd been through, all I'd done for him, he just believed them. And I couldn't shake the thought that if he really needed this peace of mind, then maybe he'd already made up his mind about me. I tried to explain how hurtful it was, how betrayed I felt. I mean, I was carrying his child, and he was treating me like some stranger. And then, of course, the tears came. I was a hormonal mess, stressed, exhausted, and now dealing with my husband, basically questioning my loyalty. I told him how much this hurt me, that it made me feel like all the sacrifices I'd made didn't mean anything. I was on the road half the time, working this grueling job to get us financially stable for the baby, and now he's sitting here wondering if the baby's even his? It just shattered me. Seeing how upset I was, he tried to backtrack a little. He started saying he was sorry, that he didn't mean to hurt me, and that he was just overthinking. But that's the thing. He had already said it. He had already asked the question. The damage was done. I felt like he'd just torn down every bit of trust we'd built. And then he had the nerve to say that if it was that big of a deal, we could just drop it and pretend like it didn't happen. But how do you pretend something like that didn't happen? How do you just move past something that big? He told me not to take it so seriously, that it was just a thought he'd had, and that he wasn't actually accusing me of anything. But if he wasn't accusing me, then what was this? It felt exactly like an accusation, no matter how much he tried to soften it. It felt like he'd decided I was someone who could be unfaithful, that I was someone he had to be suspicious of. And there's no way to erase that. Eventually, he stopped pushing for it, and I thought maybe he'd finally come to his senses. Maybe he realized how much he'd hurt me, and was actually going to let it go. He apologized and promised to never bring it up again. But I was left there feeling like the foundation of our relationship had a huge crack in it. I tried to push it down, tried to focus on the baby and let it go, but deep down, I couldn't stop thinking about it. This was the man I'd built my life around, the man I was about to have a child with, and he was treating me like a stranger. I went to bed that night with a million thoughts racing through my head. I kept replaying the conversation, trying to figure out how we got to this point. And honestly, I didn't have an answer. I couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed, that something was different now. And no matter how much I tried to ignore it, that doubt was going to stick with me. All right, so fast forward to when our baby boy finally arrived. All that stress and worry about the pregnancy, the exhaustion from work, all of it. It kind of faded when I held him for the first time. He was perfect, and it felt like everything I'd gone through was worth it. I thought maybe this would be the thing that brought us closer again. Maybe now that he could actually see his son, all those doubts he'd been carrying would just disappear. I wanted so badly for this to be a fresh start for us as a family. But honestly, even in those first weeks, I could feel that something was off. It wasn't like my husband wasn't happy. He was excited, doting on our son, doing all the right things. But there was this vibe, this, I don't know, tension? He'd be holding our baby, looking down at him, and I'd catch this strange look on his face, like he was thinking too hard about something. He kept saying things like, "He's got your nose," or "He looks just like you," which would have been sweet if it wasn't for that little edge in his tone. It was like he was searching for proof, needing to convince himself that our baby was really his. At first, I brushed it off. I was already emotional from the whole newborn stage, running on zero sleep and just trying to keep myself together. So I told myself I was overreacting, reading too much into things. But then, he started hinting at it again. Just these little comments here and there, like, "I wonder which side of the family he'll take after," or, "Wouldn't it be crazy if he looked totally different in a few months?" It was like he couldn't let go of the doubt, like he was just waiting for some sign to prove he was right to question me. It hurt, honestly. Here I was, recovering, doing everything I could to take care of our son, and he's still looking at me like I might have done something wrong. I tried to talk to him about it, hoping maybe he'd come clean and say what was on his mind. But every time he'd brush it off. He'd say I was overthinking things, or that I was being too sensitive, that he was just making observations. But I could feel it. The trust was just shaky. Then came the real shocker. One night, we were putting the baby down, and he brings it up, plain as day. I've been thinking, maybe we should just go ahead and do the paternity test. Just like that. No lead up, no softening it this time. Just throws it out there like it's no big deal. I felt like my heart stopped for a second. I had convinced myself he'd moved past this, that we were on the same page now, focusing on our family. But here he was, still holding on to this doubt, and he wanted a paternity test like it was just a regular thing to ask for. I don't think I even responded at first. I just stared at him, trying to process that this was really happening. I had just given birth to his child, our child, and he was telling me he wouldn't let it go unless we did this test. I finally asked him why he still felt this way, why he couldn't trust me after everything we'd been through. And he just shrugged and said it was something he needed to be sure about. He kept saying it was for his peace of mind, that it wasn't a reflection on me or our relationship, just something he needed to feel right about everything. But I didn't believe that. If he really trusted me, he wouldn't need this so-called peace of mind. It felt like he was just trying to find a way to justify his own insecurities and blaming it on me. I tried one last time to make him understand how hurtful this was, how it felt like he was doubting everything about us, but it was like talking to a wall. He had it in his head that this was the only way he'd ever be fully at ease, and nothing I said was going to change that. He even tried to make me feel guilty, saying that if I truly had nothing to hide, I'd do it without a problem. That was the kicker for me. It was like he was accusing me all over again. But this time, it was out in the open. I wanted to scream, honestly. I wanted to just lay out everything I'd done for him, every sacrifice I'd made, every long day on the road, all for him and this family we were building. But I didn't. I was so tired of defending myself, of proving that I was worthy of trust, that I was loyal, that I'd been nothing but committed to him. So I told him that if it meant that much to him, fine. We'd do the test. I was too exhausted to keep fighting, and honestly, I just wanted it to be over. I thought maybe, if we did it, he'd finally see how ridiculous this whole thing had been and realize how much he'd hurt me in the process. But I didn't feel any sense of relief. If anything, it just made me feel emptier. Here I was, agreeing to something that no woman should have to agree to, just to make the man I'd done everything for feel sure. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a test. It was like he was putting our entire relationship on trial, making me prove myself in a way that just felt wrong. And the worst part? Even if this test finally put his doubts to rest, I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to look at him the same way again. All right, so we went ahead with the paternity test. He was still pushing for it, like he'd backed me into this corner, and there was no way out but to agree. So, fine. He wanted a test? I'd give him the test. But he didn't just want one of those home tests you can get online. No, he needed a real one with legal validity. He said it like that too, all official, like he'd already planned the whole thing out. The idea of him sitting around looking up legal paternity tests while I was nursing our newborn honestly made my stomach turn. Anyway, he found this agency, and we set up an appointment. We both had to go, take the baby, go through this whole process of getting swabbed, signing forms, and sitting in this tiny, sterile room that felt like a place for people who have serious issues. It was cold, uncomfortable, and I couldn't believe we were actually there. Part of me kept waiting for him to see how ridiculous this was. Maybe pull back and say, hey, let's not do this after all. But that didn't happen. He was dead serious, just sitting there like this was completely normal. When it was done, we went home, and he acted like everything was fine, like we hadn't just been through one of the most humiliating things of my life. I went into our bedroom, closed the door, and just sat there trying to process it. I felt numb, like I'd given up some part of myself just to keep him happy, and he didn't even seem to get it. He was actually in a good mood, like he'd just fixed some big issue in our relationship. All I could think was, did he really believe this would fix anything? While we waited for the results, things were awkward, to say the least. He'd try to act normal, but I could barely look at him without feeling this huge wall between us. It wasn't like I wanted to punish him or be cold, but I just couldn't pretend everything was okay. Every time I saw him holding our son, or making some little comment about how he'd be a good dad, it felt hollow, like he'd lost his right to all those things by putting me through this. It's like he couldn't understand that trust isn't something you just get back by showing a piece of paper. Finally, the results came in. I remember him opening the envelope, looking at it for a second, and then he just starts grinning. "Well, guess what? He's mine," he said with this weird, almost relieved laugh, like he'd just been proven right about something. I can't describe the mix of anger and sadness I felt in that moment. All I managed to say was, "Of course, he's yours." I don't know what he expected me to do. Jump up and down? Thank him for finally believing in me? He spent the rest of that night in this great mood, like some kind of weight had been lifted off him. But for me, I just felt heavier, like that weight he'd been carrying had landed right on me. The worst part was that he didn't even seem to notice how messed up I was. He kept telling me how happy he was, that we could put this behind us now, that we could finally move on. It's like he thought this piece of paper erased everything he'd put me through, like it magically fixed all the hurt he'd caused. But here's the thing, seeing him smile, seeing him act like this was a win, it made me realize that maybe he didn't really understand what trust was. He thought he'd gotten some big answer, like this result had solved our problems. But it hadn't solved anything. If anything, it showed me just how far apart we'd drifted without me even realizing it. I tried to talk to him about how I was feeling, how much it hurt that he'd let himself get so wrapped up in doubts that he'd needed a test to believe me. But every time I tried to explain, he'd brush it off. "It's over now," he'd say. "You don't need to keep going over it." Like I was the one dragging this out. Like I was holding on to something that didn't matter anymore. But how could I just drop it when he'd shown me, in the biggest way possible, that he didn't trust me? He seemed almost annoyed after a while, like he couldn't understand why I wasn't moving on as easily as he was. He'd make these little comments like, "I just needed that closure," or "I never doubted you, I just needed to be sure." And every time he said stuff like that, it felt like he was ripping open the wound again. This was my husband, the person I thought I'd share my life with, and he was talking about closure, like I was some stranger he couldn't quite trust. I realized then that maybe I'd been fooling myself. I'd thought that once we got the results, things would go back to normal, that he'd see how wrong he was. But instead, he was just relieved, like he'd avoided some disaster, and I was left feeling like the disaster had already happened, right in our own home. I went to bed that night feeling lonelier than I'd ever felt before, right next to the man I thought I knew. It was clear he got what he wanted out of all this. But I was left with something else, a nagging feeling that maybe, after everything I'd done, after all we'd been through, he didn't see me as his partner the way I saw him. And honestly, I didn't know what to do with that. Final update. All right, so here's how it all finally came to a head. After we got the results back from the paternity test, proving, as if I didn't already know, that he was our son's father, something inside me just broke. I looked at that piece of paper, and I looked at him, sitting there all happy and relieved, and I knew right then and there that I couldn't keep doing this. This wasn't a marriage. This wasn't love. This was me bending over backward for someone who doubted my loyalty, even when I was practically supporting his life. I was done. I'd thought, maybe naively, that once he saw the results, he'd realize what a mess he'd created, that he'd regret putting me through all this. But he didn't. All he did was grin, like he'd won something, like he was safe now. That relief in his eyes, it made me sick. It was like he thought he'd dodged a bullet, that he was somehow lucky. Meanwhile, I was sitting there with a baby in my arms, feeling humiliated and betrayed. He just couldn't see it. He didn't understand the damage he'd done, and worse, he didn't seem to care. So I told him I wanted a divorce. It felt like ripping off a bandage that had been there way too long. At first, he just laughed it off, like he thought I was being dramatic. But when he realized I was serious, he tried to talk me out of it. He started saying things like, "This is just a rough patch," and "We'll get through this." But the truth was, I didn't want to get through this with him. I'd lost all respect for him, and once respect is gone, what's left? He didn't get that. He just kept pleading, acting like a few apologies could undo months of mistrust and humiliation. I told him that I'd had enough of being treated like I was the one who needed to prove myself. I was the one who'd been there for him through everything, who'd taken on his debt, put his car in my name, helped him clean up the financial mess he was drowning in, and he couldn't even give me the basic trust that should come in a marriage. I said all of this to him, and I could tell it finally started to sink in. He realized he'd screwed up, and big time. But by then, it was too late. I was out. Once the divorce process started, it got real for him. This was no rough patch, like he'd tried to call it. This was the end. He suddenly had to face the reality of what he'd lost. With the house in my name, he had no claim to it. He moved out, went back to his family, and had to deal with his own financial mess without my help. That alone must have been a shock for him. No more me bailing him out, No more me covering his debt or making his life easier. He was left with nothing but his debt, and he had to handle that on his own now. To make it worse for him, since I had primary custody of our son, he had to pay me child support. This guy, who'd been living off me while doubting my loyalty, now had to pay up, and from what I heard, it wasn't easy for him. He was scrambling, trying to figure out how to make ends meet. His friends and family weren't exactly in a position to help him out either. I guess he thought he'd always have me as his safety net, but I was done. A few months passed, and he started showing up again, trying to get back in my life under the excuse of seeing his son. I was fine with him seeing our son. He's the dad, and I wasn't going to keep him away from his kid. But it became clear he had other intentions. He'd linger after visits, trying to talk to me, trying to get me to reconsider the divorce. He'd bring up memories from when we first got together, talk about how he missed our life together, even tried apologizing all over again, saying he knew he messed up. But by that point, I was over it. I was over him. It was almost sad watching him try so hard, but it was also infuriating because he still didn't get it. He kept saying things like, "We can make this work," and "I know we're meant to be together." But all I could see was the man who'd let his own insecurities and his family's opinions wreck what we had. The man who didn't trust me enough to believe I was faithful. How could he think I'd want him back after that? At one point, he even tried to say he was a different person now, that he saw the error of his ways. But the thing is, I was tired of hearing his promises. This was the same man who'd sat there grinning when he got the paternity results, as if he'd finally caught me in some lie. He'd made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage, someone who had to prove their worth over and over again. And now, just because he was down on his luck, he wanted me back? No thanks. I started setting boundaries, making it clear that he was only welcome to see our son, and that our conversations would be strictly about our child. But even then, he tried pushing, saying he missed his family, that he was lost without us. I just had to stand firm and remind him that he had his chance, that he'd chosen to let other people's doubts destroy his marriage, and now he had to live with the consequences. Eventually, he got the message. He stopped trying as much, though every now and then, he'd still throw in a comment about how he missed me, or how he wished things had turned out differently. It didn't matter. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going back on it. Looking back now, I realize I should have seen this coming. Maybe I'd ignored the red flags, thinking we could work through it, thinking that his insecurities would fade once he saw how committed I was. But people don't change just because you love them enough. He made his choice to believe others over me, to doubt me when I'd been nothing but loyal, and I made my choice to walk away from someone who couldn't see my worth. In the end, I came out of it stronger, knowing that I'd done the right thing. I was done living my life proving myself to someone who didn't deserve it. Now, I have my son, my home, and my peace of mind. And honestly, I couldn't ask for more.